Good day, all, and welcome to today's conversation. My name is Merapelo Letebele, and I am honored to be hosting this discussion on a topic that is crucial for Botswana right now and the Southern African region as a whole, where we'll be exploring unlocking economic potential and building a more integrated, resilient future. We are privileged to have with us today Sennye Obuseng, a renowned economist and policy specialist whose insights span finance, regional development, investments, and the challenges and even opportunities facing African economies in a globalized world. We'll explore Botswana's current economic realities, regional integration, migration, investment, and the role of foreign direct investment, as well as the lessons history has taught us about resource sovereignty. Without further ado, let's welcome Obuseng to our discussion.
Thank you, Merapelo. I'm Sennye Obuseng, based here in Gaborone, Botswana. I'm an economist. I do policy and strategy work. Have been at the game for more than 25 years. I'm happy to be on this platform.
Thank you very much. So I'm just wondering if Botswana has ever had a time when families were economically secure with enough money for retirement, where public services and social safety nets were good, when there were no problems. Do we have that history?
No, we don't. Remember, Botswana is a developing country. At present, we are considered an upper middle income country, and that's one of the weaknesses of economics, because we are basically looking at a per capita income. We are not looking at how people are living, but there's never been a time when the majority of households were free from want. As for services, of course, they have progressively improved over time, but we have seen a deterioration in the last couple of years, with health and education in particular going through a very bad cycle. Right now, I think it's fair to say we have a health crisis. I would also say we have an education crisis. But to answer your question directly, there's never been a time when households were fine, everyone had access to services, because, as I said, we're a developing country, a very unequal one too. So a great many of our households have lived a life of struggle since independence.
So why would anybody, based on that background, say that we are a success story?
Well, it's a matter of where you started and where you are. Remember in 1966, when Botswana attained independence, it was probably one of the poorest countries in the world. I can't recall off the top of my head what per capita income was like at the time, but it was very low. In terms of the classification of economies, we were at the bottom of the so-called least developed countries, and we couldn't finance anything, not even government. So in relative terms, we have made progress to the extent that in terms of per capita GDP, we are looking at upper middle income. In terms of financing government, financing development, we've been okay for a couple of decades. The current fiscal crisis is new. In terms of infrastructure, we have made tremendous progress since independence, both social infrastructure and industrial infrastructure, heavy infrastructure roads, telecommunications, power, and so on. We've made tremendous progress. So relatively speaking, we've made progress, and that's why we are considered a success story. But the challenges have always been acute. We've always had high levels of poverty. We've always had high levels of unemployment. We've always had problems of access to services for many in our small population.
Yes, I would like us to go back a little bit because, when people use industry-specific jargon, especially in the economic sector and finance sector, it is not easy for ordinary people to really understand. But the people themselves can see. Even me as a layperson, I can see where changes have been and where we're still lacking. And I'd like us to really hone in and just put it plain for the people to understand what sort of economic system did we have before independence and before the diamonds were found. Usually people will say agrarian or whatever, but I don't know if we have a specific term for the kind of things that we did, because as much as you've said, and I know people were living in poverty and people didn't have jobs, but the people fed themselves. And I think to a large extent, whether the people were poor or not, or were experiencing hunger or not, is dependent on rainfall more than any other thing. If there was no rain, then they couldn't grow their crops and they couldn't feed themselves. So I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to situate our economic background in terms that can actually crystallize it for us.
1966, we were a very poor, rural, and agriculture-based economy. And we are talking about agriculture at its most basic, subsistence agriculture for the most part. People lived off what they grew on their land. There was very little trade, very little manufacturing. It was essentially a subsistence economy. And close to 80% of the households were poor at the time. So it was a rural economy, no infrastructure, less than 10 kilometers of tarmac. I'm talking about modern roads, less than 10 kilometers. Few people at the time had tertiary qualifications. I'm talking about citizens here, not the foreigners who were living with us. There were very few schools except for missionary schools, very few hospitals and clinics. It was a very poor country. Life expectancy was very low. I mean, people didn't live that long on average. And we didn't travel that much, even within the country, because there were no roads. As you can imagine, 1966, in a village such as mine, you could count only a handful of families that had cars. So it was a
grim existence.
Yes, a grim existence. You could put it that way.
Yeah. No, that we understand. The reason why I'm asking you this is because I'm not trying to be controversial, but I want to bring out something that I think that can set us on the road of where I'm trying to take the conversation. In 1966, okay, Africa was as rural as they come everywhere. And
absolutely,
what I'm saying,
you have to go to South Sudan to appreciate what I'm talking about.
Yes. So anyway, the pressure of trying to measure up to Western levels of development, I think, is what started us off. Now, I'm trying to see the moment in time. What sparked the desire for the nation of Botswana to want to aspire for this Western style civilization and all the benefits that accrue to anybody who pursues that path, that economic path?
Well, we were meeting people here. People from Europe, first the missionaries, and of course we're under colonial administration. Remember, so we had people who understood what development looked like, who understood that human beings needed to be developed in terms of human capital, in terms of basic skills, in terms of health. So we had people who understood what developing people meant. Of course, we also had a few of our own going outside the country, to South Africa, to Europe. And in those sojourns, they got to understand what life looked like in other places. So the hunger for progress was necessitated both by the challenge of our existence here in Botswana as well as our experience of what people live like in other parts of the world, as some of us went outside. It was also driven by the knowledge and experience of those who came to live amongst us, including the colonial administrators.
Well, here we are. I think for a little while there, Botswana enjoyed what, by all accounts, and as you've rightly pointed, we experienced a bit of success somewhere along the line. But right now, our country is broke. We are in a serious crisis. We are facing serious economic challenges. We know that the diamond revenues have plummeted. So, in your view, where did things start to go off track?
Well, there are two sides to the problem as I see it. One is that we have always lived precariously, depending on a single commodity to drive the economy and give us the lives we lived when diamonds were doing well. We've always known that that could crash one day, but for a long time, diamonds held up and they sustained government, they sustained the quality of life that Botswana had become accustomed to. And of course, they drove progress. That came crashing down in the last quarter of 2023, 2023, if I get my history right. And that was the time when the global diamond market crashed, natural diamonds market, I must say, crashed on account of stiff competition from lab-grown diamonds. So part of the problem is that a risk that we have always known existed materialized. We had failed to mitigate it by doing what should have come naturally, which is to use the proceeds from diamonds to build other sectors of the economy. Diversify, as economists would say. The diversification project had failed in Botswana. The other part of the problem, which to me is even more fundamental, is the deterioration in governance that began, in my view, it began in earnest in 2008, when we began to see a deterioration in governance that came with an erosion of institutional integrity, the integrity of our institutions. And this combination for me was always going to spell trouble for us. Right now, where we are, we need to get our institutions back. We need to get the public service back. We need to get our institutions functioning so that they hold the line as we try to build back towards a future.
How do you think we can achieve that? How do you think we can do that? How can we at least try to get them to be stable, the public institutions?
Well, it's a matter of what the political leadership decides to do. It's always been about choices. If you have a leadership that appreciates governance, that appreciates that good institutions are the foundations of success for a nation, then they will build those institutions. We need to have the patience to build those institutions back because there are no shortcuts. If we want the rule of law, we want institutions that are service-oriented instead of those that extract value for the elites. Then we have a chance of bouncing back. We will bounce back, but it will take real leadership to build our institutions back so that we have competent, service-oriented institutions.
Do you think that ordinary Botswana are aware of this? I mean, they hear every day that the government or the country is broke, but do you think they really understand what it means? And how is that reflected in their ordinary lives? The fact that things have collapsed. Or have we collapsed or we're nearing collapse? What's the situation?
In my book, we are on the brink. Right now, we're on the brink of collapse. Right now, the government is struggling to provide basic services. The government is struggling to pay suppliers. That's a problem. So, as I see it, we are in a very precarious situation. And to answer your question directly, of course, the people, citizens can see it. They can appreciate that there's too little money in the economy. They can appreciate that jobs are being lost. They can appreciate that the government is not able to provide services. And I believe they're beginning to appreciate that we have issues of governance that we have to attend to very quickly.
Well, okay, now let's jump on to talk about a little bit about, trade, migration, and regional integration. We know that for the longest time, everybody has been talking about African unity and it's not even happening. And something tells me that if you start with regional integration and all the different regions are doing the same thing, we might end up converging somewhere. I'm not sure if that can actually happen, but now, we know that Southern Africa is very rich in resources, all kinds, and talent, yet there's no regional trade to speak of. For instance, it always looks like it is South Africa producing stuff and then taking it to the rest of the region. What is really holding back this free movement of goods and services in a way that can benefit us all?
Well, intra-Africa trade has always been low because for a couple of reasons. One, most of Africa has had no manufacturing capacity to speak of. Southern Africa, if you look at Southern Africa, the manufacturing hub of the region has for a long time been South Africa. The rest of Southern Africa has had very little manufacturing capacity. We have always imported manufactured goods, and even today, for a great many of us, that's the case. It's very difficult to find goods made in Botswana in our shelves. It's a very small quantity of goods that we can find in our shelves. It's even more difficult to find good maize in Botswana in the shelves in other Southern African countries. So part of the problem is that we have not industrialized. We have not built a manufacturing base. That's a problem. The other part of the problem is that the African market, continentally and within regions, is still very much fragmented in terms of infrastructure, lack of infrastructure that connects countries, fragmented in terms of policies that are not harmonized. So it's been very difficult for Africa to trade within itself for those reasons. If you look at the trade regimes in African countries, they are very diverse. A friend recently was telling me about his experience moving from Botswana to Zambia. He entered Zambia via the Kasane-Kazungula Bridge with no traffic, no other vehicles. It took him hours. It took him and his crew hours to go through Zambian immigration and customs processes. These are the things that Africans have to contend with as they try to trade with each other. Customs and immigration procedures that are not harmonized, lack of infrastructure in a lot of places, it's a lot of policies around trade that are in conflict. So there's much that we need to do to promote trade. of course, we also have to produce the tradables in the first place.
That reminds me that despite the fact that, Britain has left the EU, presented a much more enviable model of regional trade that Africans were looking at. But I'm just wondering if, there are any other success stories like the European Union that could be realistically adapted and maybe improved to fit the Southern African region? Or do you think our circumstances require a completely different approach?
Regional integration makes sense everywhere. It makes sense even more where you have small, fragmented economies. The benefits of integration will be very high there. Remember, in Europe, you are talking about countries like Germany, Britain, Spain, Italy, very strong economies. They did benefit from regional integration because trade does help expand markets, drive growth. That's what it does. So here as well, we need regional integration to work. The difference is that in Europe, the understanding was sufficiently strong for them to appreciate even the preconditions for becoming one as an integrated union. Issues of economic convergence, issues of policy convergence. Of course, they also built the institutions that would drive regional integration. Not only that, they also mustered the political will to do the needful for integration. Here in Africa, we are struggling even at the level of political will. In fact, even before we talk about political will, we are struggling with understanding, at least at the level of leadership, because people can drive what they don't understand. Regional integration promises so much for Africa. In fact, biggest potential game changer for Africa, because it could help build a market, more than $1 trillion market, 1.3 billion people. It promises so much. But we are light years away from getting it right at the pace we are proceeding.
Why do you think that is? I mean, African leaders understand luxury, they consume luxury products, they do all kinds of things which are derived from strong economic practices, right? So why is it difficult for them to understand, okay, if you want to have all these jets or whatever it is that you like, you need to do these kind of things? What is so difficult about that? Are they not as smart as they should be, or what's the problem?
African leaders get those things. Is there are people who don't get them. They live in luxury. Some of them get stinking rich. They know how to get stinking rich, to use office to get stinking rich. But more seriously, Africa is still struggling with the basics of governance. All these things I was talking about, political will, building institutions, building up the mechanisms for cooperation between countries on regional public goods. These are very difficult things to do if you don't understand the basics of governance. And that's the problem in Africa. We are struggling with the basics of governance within our individual countries and across countries. Regional integration requires very high levels of cooperation that require some basic understanding of governance. On paper, it should be easy for us to move towards policy convergence within, say, a region such as SADC. But we are light years away from that policy convergence. The rhetoric on regional integration is not carried into the conferences where African leaders meet and try to fashion out.
Let me just jump in there. What were they talking? Because I know they met, SADC leadership met for a change of guard or whatever last week. So what do you think? What do these people talk about when they are in all these SADC stuff? I mean, what's happening?
Well, for the most part, if the past is anything to go by, they will mouth the right things. They go back to their capital cities, and it's business as usual. It's business as usual. So you get too little progress on regional integration, and here we are. We are still struggling to build bridges towards each other in economic terms. At least we're still struggling. Yes, we can meet to talk wherever we talk, but we're still struggling to build bridges. Economic bridges. The trade corridors are underdeveloped. The regional public goods, I'm talking here about infrastructure, are underdeveloped. We are struggling with power. We have the resources, but we're still struggling with power. Part of the problem is that we can't cooperate where it makes sense for us to cooperate. We are still struggling with governments that for the most part are busy building extractive institutions. I mean, look at South Africa, look at Botswana, look at Zimbabwe, right? We're still struggling with getting the basics of governance right.
What are these extractive?
We are building extractive institutions.
What are those?
Extractive institutions are institutions that, for the most part, serve elites, the ruling elites, their friends in business. That's basically it.
Oh, they're just extracting stuff. Yeah, the goods and benefits.
Yeah. Every African leader who gets into office gets rich overnight.
Yeah.
They are very good at delivering for their families and friends wherever they live, and very poor at delivering for the people.
Okay,
that's
so
what happens.
Somewhere in the mix of this regional integration, I know lies issues of migration, which are causing a lot of consternation. We just have to look at what's happening in South Africa, for instance. And we had a somewhat well-functioning state like Botswana before this current crisis, where government was reasonably able to provide for the citizens in terms of maybe the healthcare, even though it has collapsed now. But I'm talking about a few years back where people had access to services, for instance. I'm just wondering if Botswana has some sort of a selfish or protectionist attitude that they don't want other people coming in to benefit from free education and healthcare, for instance, like we see happening in South Africa. Do you think that is a factor? Do you think people are scared of migration because those who seem to be doing well, in quote marks, fear that they would have to share their limited resources with others coming in through under the guise of this regional integration?
Well, one of the reasons why when you open borders and so on, you need some degree of economic convergence. One of the reasons is that you don't want individual countries to inherit each other's problems. Zimbabwe has been exporting problems to Botswana, to South Africa, to the rest of the world. Of course, it has also been exporting its brightest. You know,
brain drain.
Brain drain. You know, the best of Zimbabwe are creating wealth for other nations, from Botswana to South Africa, to the United States, to Europe, Arab, and so the Arab world, and so on. So the point I'm making is it's very difficult for a country that's reasonably successful to open its borders, welcome economic, what do you call them now?
Refugees, I don't know. I'm still
using
the old terms.
Running away from acute economic problems, it's very difficult for them to do that. That's why you are seeing the kind of xenophobia that is very apparent in South Africa. That is why you are seeing so many illegal immigrants from Zimbabwe in Botswana. So regional integration will help, but there are difficult things that we have to handle around immigration.
Like what? Like what? What sort of difficult things do
like the disparities in levels of economic development, disparities that speak to the capacities of individual economies to meet the basics of survival for their people. Now, if you say opening borders, it will help Botswana, South Africa, and others that are doing reasonably well. Well, the experience of South Africa is not saying so. The experience of Botswana may not necessarily say so. There are positives, obviously, including labor, meeting the labor needs of the countries that receive immigrants. There are positives there. But it's very complicated when it comes to the movement of people, precisely because some countries are where they are, and I would venture into saying they need to sort themselves out, quite frankly, for them to play their roles positively in this regional integration enterprise.
What hope do the people from Zimbabwe, for instance, have if there I think reasonable suspicion that you cannot do anything with the government because they rig elections? What hope is there for African peoples whose governments are the ones messing up the economies on purpose for personal gain and to the exclusion of the common man? What can they do?
I believe that Zimbabwe will get a good government one day. That the bad governments we have in Africa and in Southern Africa in particular will one day go.
I just singled out Zimbabwe just because, it is the best one.
No, I understand that. I understand that. They will go. I think we will get a transition to good governments in Africa. It will happen. It's a pity I can't say what will make it happen and how soon, but it's inevitable that we will get a competent government in Zimbabwe, everywhere in the region. I know that trends in South Africa are not particularly inspiring, but even there, and thanks to the sound institutions they have in South Africa, it's possible to vote in a different government there. So I'm very optimistic that we will get competent governments around Africa. It's inevitable.
Now, if resources were no object, what one infrastructure project would you fast track tomorrow to unlock growth, especially for Botswana? If you could just pick one thing that would be surefire, what would it be? Or one or two or even three?
Yes, I was about to tell you that there is no single infrastructure project that will turn things around for Botswana. We are a small country, 2.7 million people thereabout, and we need to trade our way to prosperity. So the first priority for me would be those aspects of infrastructure that go into turning Botswana into a regional transport and logistics hub. We sit at the center of SADC. We therefore sit on important trade corridors. If we were to develop the infrastructure around these corridors, major roads, such as the A1, and there are a few others apart from the A1, but the A1, as you know, connects South Africa to the south, to the rest of SADC, to the north, in particular Zimbabwe. And then, of course, when you move from Nata to Maum, you also have another major road there. Very important. Airport connectivity, very low. I think if we are serious about becoming a regional transport and logistics hub, we also need serious connectivity so that we can connect we can begin connecting the rest of the world to Africa, not Botswana, to Africa. We can become a transit area, a transit route for the rest of SADC and so on. We also need high-speed internet connectivity. That's a priority. We are in the information age, we can't develop without access to high-speed connectivity for business and for households. There's power, energy. We need power to be accessible, reliable, and affordable so that we can build our economy back.
Can I just jump in? When you talk about power, I remember at the end of Mogae's term, there was supposed to be this tri-nation power plant between Botswana, South Africa, and I think Zambia. I'm not sure which the third country was. Do you remember that?
I don't remember a third nation, but I do remember Mamabula.
I don't know what they were planning to do with it, but I remember as soon as I think when Zuma is the one who pulled the plug on it. He refused to.
That would be Mamabula, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not sure if there was a third country involved. But yes, that was a major coal-powered power project. It's still in the cards and is now a Botswana project, if my recollection is correct. So that's an example of how we fail as a region. To collaborate on, we have a SADC power pool. And a project like that would contribute to the regional power pool. But here we are, you get a leader pulling out, sometimes for the wrong reasons. Oftentimes within the region, we compete as though we don't realize how dependent on each other's success we are.
Yeah.
You may recall the Henday manufacturing plant that was in Gaborone.
Yeah.
Which South Africa worked very hard to destroy.
Yeah. Even the one with the trucks in recent years. What do you call those trucks? Those Swedish trucks.
Exactly. Yes. So that's why for me, governance at the national level as well as at the region is a necessary ingredient for the regional integration project to succeed and for the economies of the region to succeed.
Very true. But anyway, now let's move on to a slightly different yet related segment. I want us to talk about investment and FDI especially, because it seems to be the card that everybody's pulling out these days in terms of potential economic development. And some people are saying to that there is a bit of neo-colonial dynamics involved. So we know that Botswana is a resource-rich country, yet much of the foreign investment results in profits leaving the country. Profit repatriation. Is this the best way to go about it? Is this a neutral business practice, or, as some people have said, a continuation of a colonial-style extraction under a modern guise?
Well, the good thing now is that African states are independent. Botswana is independent. We make our policies, we make our laws. I think the negative voices around investment are for the most part misguided. We need investment, domestic and foreign. Developed countries have made attracting investment an art. America still prioritizes attracting investment from outside, as do other developed countries. I don't know how African countries, with their enormous development financing gaps, would turn their backs on investment. We need investment. Now, you're talking about colonial style investment, management of investment that leads to the repatriation of profits and so on. In this era, no African government has an excuse for not negotiating agreements that are good for its people. The tools are available at the global level. The tools are available at their disposal at the national level because they make laws. What we need to understand is that investment is about win-wins. It is about win-win situations. So we've got to enter into these agreements with foreign companies, not foreign governments, foreign companies. We've got to enter into these agreements with them with the understanding that they are in for profit. We are in for profit as well, however we define it. So to me, really, at the end of the day, it boils down to how competent or how even attentive our governments are to the matter of getting the best deals for their people.
Let me just say this. We know the debacle between Masisi and the De Beers. So how would you frame that in relation to what we're talking about right now? Was Masisi doing good to ask for a bigger stake for Botswana? Was there something else that we may not be aware of that turned the relations sour?
I don't think asking for a bigger stake was wrong. The original deals that we made obviously were skewed heavily in favor of the mining houses, because in the 1960s, the 1970s, and so on, the capacity to negotiate on our part was limited. The laws were weak. So progressively, we've been trying to get better and better deals. It didn't start with Masisi. The whole idea of allowing yourselves to have agreements that are time-bound is to allow yourself, to accord yourself opportunity to renegotiate at the lapse of every contract or agreement that you have. So Masisi was within, the Masisi regime was within its rights to look for a better deal. Of course, that deal also had to satisfy the partner. And
what do you think the partner was not happy about?
Well, I was also not happy about a lot of things. In the main, the manner in which the president turned the negotiations into a political spectacle, ridiculed the partner. You need, as an investor, especially a large investor like De Beers, but investors in general, you need to have the confidence that you are dealing with a partner that respects agreements, that respects negotiation processes, that conducts itself professionally. And I don't think Masisi conducted himself well during the course of that negotiation. You don't negotiate in public to start with. You don't ridicule a partner you are negotiating with and put undue pressure on the partner. You don't even send vibes that suggest that you could act outside the law, because you're getting those vibes.
Yeah.
So really, for me, there were many problems there, but there was nothing wrong with the Botswana government seeking a better deal.
Yeah. Now, can we talk about the Diamond Trading Hub, DTC? What's going on with that?
DTC was a good initiative. As a major producer of diamonds, it was necessary that we make the effort to move up the value chain. I think we missed opportunity as a country to make that move, say, in the 1980s and so on, when De Beers really dominated the global diamond industry. Was a good initiative. It's still a good initiative. There have been developments in the world, especially in the global diamonds industry, that have undermined our progress in terms of our attempts to move up the diamond value chain. Outside amongst those, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Remember, Russia is a major producer of diamonds. And all the attempts to keep Russian diamonds out of the market have obviously affected us. But I think before then, we're doing very well. Antwerp wasn't a problem really at the time. So for me, I think the problems for our diamond industry began with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the emergence of lab-grown diamonds. We've always struggled, I must admit, we have always struggled to get diamond manufacturers to set up shop here. We've struggled. Those who invested in diamond polishing and other aspects that we wanted to do in the country don't seem to have grown that much. But I think the biggest threat to our industry came from lab-grown diamonds, no two ways about it, as well as, of course, to a lesser extent, but still significant, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
There's a movement, it's kind of obscure to me, but there is a movement which goes by the title Pan-Africanism, and some folks in that, I don't understand it quite fully myself, but Africans who are into that feel that these Western economic models cannot work for African countries because everything is controlled by the Western countries. They dominate the financial systems and all that. What are your views on that?
I don't quite buy into some of these arguments. The truth is that if you are a country like Botswana, you are pursuing development. You are a sovereign nation pursuing development for your people. You make use of the tools that are available. You make use of the tools that are available. If development finance is not available in Africa, we have not organized ourselves to finance development, what are we supposed to do? Are we not expected to make use of the sources of finance that are available? If development advisory services are available in institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, and so on, are we not supposed to make use of them? I think we will do well to use the tools that work for us, no matter where they come from. We would do well to embrace innovation, and there's a lot of it happening around development finance. Would do well. Would do well to organize ourselves as Africa so that we could do a better job of financing our own development. But to lobby for substitutes for what we have that don't exist doesn't make much sense to me. We are still going to seek development from the West, from the East, from within Africa. And until such time that we are able to do these things amongst ourselves, let's just accept that in this integrated world, we need to work with whoever we have to work with to achieve the results we want. That's the way I look at it.
You actually tend
I don't think it's wise for us even to get sucked into geopolitical battles.
Yeah.
We just need to reach the agreements that work for us with whoever is there for us when we need them.
If you could leave one piece of advice for Botswana's next generation of leaders, what would it be?
I honestly believe that our current, even our leaders now and in the future, number one, they need to prioritize governance, internalize this thing called good democratic governance, because serving the public good requires competent governance. That's one. And of course, when we talk about governance, I'm talking about it broadly to include all these things, including corruption and so on. So our leaders have to do that. Our leaders have to invest in their people big time. Our leaders have to invest in building competitive investment climates, because there will be no development in an economy or a country into which investment does not flow. So when you get governance right, you get the policies right, you get the institutions right, you invest in people so that you get the human capital that you need, you invest in infrastructure, the chances that you progress are very high. Japan built an economy without a resource base to speak of, if we're talking about natural resources. So did Singapore. It was human capital, it was good governance that made things work for them. And since we are blessed with natural resources, we may also want to look at the United Arab Emirates as an example of how you turn natural capital into alternative forms of capital.
Yeah, it's very sad because I remember at the end of Masira's reign, when he went to all the Asian tigers, and that was the first time I was maybe 20 years old when I first heard the word diversification. I was straight out of high school at the time, waiting to go to university. And nothing has happened. I'm talking about what,
Yeah.
94? Today it's 2025. We have to get serious. But anyway, I want you to imagine that it's the year 2035. Botswana has, let's just suppose that it has unlocked its economic potential. What does it look like on the streets, and in the lives of the ordinary people?
It could happen very fast, actually. That dream of a Botswana in 2035, 36 that has unlocked its economic potential could materialize if we get our act together. What will Botswana look like? Number one, we would have empowered people who are in charge of their individual destinies, literally, because we would have good health, we would have good education, we would have capital within us, empowered people. We would have a people that have access to basic services, beautiful infrastructure services, health services. We would have a people that experience inclusive prosperity, where no one really is left behind. That's the kind of society I dream of in 2036 when our current vision cycle runs out. But of course, I'm a realist. I'm looking at trends at present. That dream it doesn't look good, really. Our prospects for achieving that dream don't look that good, but it could happen.
That is a very powerful closing reflection, Sennye Obuseng. And thank you very much for talking to me. You have injected a new sense of hope for me. I just hope that our leaders can do what's right by the people.
Well, that's my prayer, Merapelo, that our leaders get it right for the sake of all of us, for the sake of posterity. I hope they get it right, not only in Botswana, but also in the region, especially in South Africa, because we are tied so much to South Africa. Thank you very much.